Alright, hi everyone, welcome back to another video of Salesforce Makes Sense. This is Imanshu and we are continuing our Apex curriculum journey. This is video 101 of this particular curriculum, and in this video we'll talk about some very important yet basic best practices. Alright, when it comes to writing code, it's actually not important to have a solution that is the best solution, but alongside it, it is equally important and rather more important to write code that is readable, write code that follows the guidelines of the basic principles, and write code that is adhering the best practices of how you write code, right? The idea behind best practices, right? You might ask, like, why do we have to follow the best practices? Why can't we just follow good practices? It's actually not just for your own good, it's actually for the sanctity of, or the sanity of the code that you have written, right? The readability of it, the understandability of it, the accessibility of it, the maintainability of it, the understanding of it, and ensuring the code does not falter in production environments for clients or any kind of use cases or background use cases or edge scenarios. All right, so what we'll look into is a mix of some very key important best practices, and if you can follow these, you'll automatically be a better developer just by following them, right? You don't have to actually master the art of problem solving, design thinking, and all of that stuff, but if you just follow this by heart, the best practices, that makes you half good. Like, I mean, the half work is already done. All right, to start with the very basic one, yet a lot of people try to do this and they do this in flows, they do this in Apex. No hard-coded IDs. So IDs, what are IDs? I mean the record IDs. So never hard code any record IDs, as your functionality might work in a current environment but won't work if you promote it to other orgs. Now, IDs are unique, understood, but they are only unique to an org and they're not unique to across orgs. So if you're working on a sandbox environment, let's say a developer environment, you promote your code to UAT, you promote it to pre-prod, and then you go to production. If you have a static hard-coded ID, things or logic might not work because of this issue. So your code might fail. So be mindful of not hard coding values in any part of the code. Okay, and it is always better to query it from schema or use custom labels to store some static value, but do not hard code them right in your Apex class or your Apex code. All right, you can even query them out. Let's say you have a public group you want to assign something to, you have a queue ID that you want to assign something to. It's always good to query it. You can query all of that stuff. So query, put a null check, and then assign it. Do not hard code any kind of IDs. Make sense? Great. The second thing is avoid DML or SOQL inside loops. So writing database related operations or any kind of query logic inside loops, when we say loops, we mean for loops, creates a very big blunder. Now that blunder kind of hits the governor limits very fast. If you have, let's say, 10 records and each of the record has 5 children, and that will take your governor limit as a hit, and it will give you a system exception, a limit exception. So avoid any kind of database operations or SOQL operations within loops. Okay, because it looks like it will not hit the governor limit, but you will never know how soon it can hit. All right, it's always better to avoid SOQL and DML statements within loops. So what is the way out? If you have something that you want to loop through, if you want information, you can actually do that loop, write a for loop, extract the information, create a map out of it, and then use it in your for loops. Okay, if you have a database operation, you don't do it inside the for loop. You write your code, insert records in a list, and then you do the database insert operation outside the for loop. Okay, you just instantiate things inside the loop. You don't write them. You don't write the database commands inside the loop. Okay. Code bulkification. Now your code should be able to handle more than one record at a time. So you should not write anything that is limited to just one record. There are some exceptions wherein you can go for it, but try bulkification always. Try to at least. Okay. So because that will ensure that your code is scalable. Tomorrow, if any migration has to happen, any data import has to happen, your code should be capable enough of handling all of those imports. Like, same record getting inserted 50 times, 500 times, 5,000 times. Your code should be bulkified so that it does not break when more than one records come in. How do you do that? Collections is your way to go. Maps is how you should be mastering maps, and you should be using maps to tackle any kind of bulkification. Next, writing efficient queries. Now we don't really understand the gravity of the fact that the resources that we consume when doing any kind of operations with the platform, it's very important to be very cautious. Why? Because we are on a multi-tenant architecture, we are on limitations, we do not even have the entire world's resources in our hand, right? And 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds does not look like a very big time, but it will feel big if you probably do a plank for 30 seconds. Try doing a plank for 30 seconds and you see how long are 30 seconds. Why am I talking about this thing? Queries usually take time because they have to look through the entire database based on what you want the result to be. So it has to find your records and then it has to return it to you, right? Why is it important for you to give right kind of filters? Why is it important for you to put the right kind of where clause? Why is it important for you to kind of drill down to the last level so that the exact records that you need are only queried? The exact number of fields that you need are only queried. It's only important because it saves time. It improves the processing time. It returns you the records faster, and that kind of improves the performance of your entire system. Okay, so query records with the best filters so that you are not unnecessarily querying any more records than needed, right? Same thing with the fields. So what we normally do, select id, name, this, that, then, where, when, and from this object. But what do I need? I just need 2 fields from that query. So why am I actually querying all the other stuff? No, not needed, right? Which is why Salesforce has actually not introduced the star asterisk sign in SQL, SOQL, our database SQL. We used to do select star from account, right? But star used to give the entire table, but that is costly because I have to get all of the records and give it to you. A good example is if you go to a pharmacy and you say, I need a painkiller. Now, how many painkillers are there in the pharmacy? There could be 100 painkillers spread across 25 shelves. Now, the compounder or the pharmacist has to actually look at all the shelves and give you all the painkillers. If you just say, I need a painkiller. So that's a very basic query. If you say, I need a painkiller which is for my head, right? So what kind of painkillers can you get? You can get a painkiller after you have done a brain surgery. You can get a painkiller just for a headache. You can get a painkiller for a migraine. So that means the pharmacist has to look at 5 different shelves for 40 different medicines. What if you say that I need a painkiller which is for my head and it's because I have a cough or a cold. My head is spinning because of that reason. So if you see, you're kind of drilling down the search area for the pharmacist. The same concept applies here, right? What if you started by saying I need a medicine? What would happen? That would mean the pharmacist would give you the entire pharmacy. But is that what you need? No, you don't need that. So why are you even asking for that? Makes sense? So I'm not kind of, scolding you. The idea is to write efficient queries, and it's just an example of understanding how database search works and how pivotal it is to be asking the right kind of questions, putting the right kind of queries so that performance is improved. All right. So if you are able to do a very good query and your friend or your colleague is not doing a good query, your performance time, I mean the code that you have written, would have a better performance time, better turnaround time. And that is a very important metric that you can use to define that, my code took just this amount of seconds, whereas this code took this much seconds. So this helps in, improving the performance testing side of the world. All right. So always write efficient queries. Use collections. So collections are something that most of us are scared of. Even I was scared of it when I started off Salesforce, but they are the most useful thing. They are the most easiest thing that we should master. Okay. List, sets, and maps. They are only these 3 collections that you have to worry about. And if you can actually master them, you don't have to write nested for loops. You don't have to do things like, run loops and check using if conditions. Maps will take care of it. A lot of features are there, whether you can do null checks, whether you can check whether a key exists or not. You can actually even directly query your results and put it in a map. So use collections wherever you can. Don't take it as something that you fear of. Take it as a challenge, and you will for sure either learn something out of it. And if you learn something out of it, next time you'll start using it, because that fear will be gone. That fear is only when things are unknown, right? When things get known, you don't fear it anymore. So instead of writing nested for loops and creating record sets over and over again, try and associate your records via map. and use map functions to check for value in loops. What will this do? This will again help you with the performance thing. It will reduce the time complexity and it will improve the code scalability. All right. Next one is another interesting one trigger per object, right? I think in my Apex triggers tutorials, you have already seen me creating only one trigger using the trigger framework. But what normally happens is, let's say we are 5 developers working, right? And let's say you and I are working with 3 other people, and each one has a task to write a trigger. So what will each one of us do? We'll create one trigger for our requirement. We'll complete the requirement and push it to production. Now in production, there are 5 triggers. What's the problem with that? Individually, the functionalities might have been working, but then when things go as a package, as a whole, there is no sequence or order of execution when you have multiple triggers per object. There's no guarantee from Salesforce that your trigger will execute first or my trigger will execute first. So that creates a discrepancy, that creates a inconsistency. Do we need that in our code? No, we should be exactly knowing what our code will do and at what point of time it will do. So if you have multiple triggers written for a single object, you would not know for sure which trigger would be initiated first. That leads to flow inconsistency. Also, you might be querying same chunk of data, and it could be a large set of data in both the triggers, which is near to irrelevant. So ensure that you have a single trigger per object which handles all the events. So write one trigger class and then write all your events inside it. What are events? Before, after, insert, delete, and all of that stuff. Okay, and then take care of it by using a trigger framework. Enhanced for loops. So instead of querying large data sets, it's always better to use enhanced for loop. Now, what is enhanced for loop? I'm not sure if you've seen me writing it, but let me just try to do something like create Apex class, best practices, Apex use case. So enhanced for loops come in handy when you actually don't want to write a loop, when you don't want to actually query and store your information in a variable and then use that variable for a loop. What would you do is you'll say for account record and you write your query here. That's an enhanced for loop. What will this do? This will basically allow me to write a query here, select id comma name from account where created date is equal to today, limit 5, and then I can work on my records here. So you see, instead of me writing this particular query outside, if I had to write it outside, right, I would do list of account list, and then I would write this query. Then I'll take this variable value, I'll put a if condition check. If it is not empty or size is greater than 0, then I'll say go ahead and query. Go ahead and run the for loop on the account list. That's how we normally write things, right? But what does this do? You have to actually create a variable. That variable will take some space. This if condition will take some time to operate. Then you go inside the for loop and here it will continue, correct? But what if you went with the other approach? That approach is independently capable enough of doing all of that stuff. If you get rid of this, you see, this will actually return a list of accounts and you are actually iterating over each account that you have in this list. If this query does not return anything, the for loop will not run. So the if condition, the list assignment is all skippable. You don't have to do it again. Plus, because this is enhanced for loop, it will run in batches. It will run in chunks. So it will take the first 200 records, go ahead for it, and then it will take the next set of 200 records. Okay, so which will save your code from running into a runtime exception. So enhanced for loops operate within a chunk of 200 records at a time, which saves your code from running into runtime exception. What will that mean? That means basically it will not, take in all the records at once. It will kind of be smart to divide it into chunks. Similarly, how batch Apex does it, right? So it's always better to go with enhanced for loop whenever you're working with large data set. All right. Use limits. Now, what is the meaning of using limits? Salesforce actually also tells you or provides some methods through which you can see what is the limit that you've already consumed and whether you want to proceed ahead or not. What if you proceed ahead, you might get an exception. So can you be cautious? Yes, you can be cautious, right? So if you know that there's a very deep hole in front of you, will you jump into it? No, right? But you might jump into it if you don't know if there's a hole in front of you. If there's a sign, if there's a warning sign that, be cautious, walk from the side, don't walk from here, or else you might go inside. So you'll be cautious beforehand. Similarly, if you want to be cautious in a code, you can use these methods: get queries, get DML statements, get DML rows. What this will do is this will tell you the number of queries that you have already consumed as part of your transaction. So if you have already consumed 98 queries, so you are already very close to getting that exception. So don't go ahead, right? If you reach 100, you'll get an exception very soon. What about DML? 150 DML statements, right? If you are at 145, you can stop your code there. Don't proceed and do some logging. Don't go ahead, or else your entire code will fail, right? DML rows, the 50,000 rows in the SOQL query. If you have a SOQL query that is returning more than that, how do you ensure that you don't get an exception? These are the kind of methods that you can use to bypass the exceptions at runtime and actually be cautious upfront if you are doubtful that the code might fail because of some DML limits. Okay, take a look at these methods and you can actually use them. Let's go to dev console. So if you see, you have the limits class available that allows you not just these 3 methods. I believe you might have more methods. So if you see limit methods here, you will see all of these methods, right? I've just talked about some specific ones which are important, like DML rows, DML statements. You can even get something like a CPU time, right? How much time has already been consumed and do I want to continue? Get future calls. How many future calls have been done already, right? So async and sync, both stuff, you can actually take a look at it. Okay, how do you use it? You just have to use the method name and just use it after the limits class. So this is your class name. The dot operator says that this is a static method from the limits class, and what is the method name? It is get DML statements. What does this return? This returns you a number. That's all you know. Okay, if you see that number is close to the limit, you can actually accordingly take an action. All right, and all of these methods are available here. You can take a look at it. Heap size is another important one. We already talked about get queries, limit queries, get query locator rows. You can use this in your batch class and all of that stuff. Okay, so good thing to be cautious. If wherever you are doubtful, you have to be cautious because you are on a multi-tenant architecture. All right, trigger framework. Now this is very close to the one trigger per object thing. A good trigger framework ensures that trigger routes all its work to a handler and a helper file. So start with one trigger per object, put all your events there. Now for each event, you should have a handler that's taking care of the actual work. Okay, so let's say you are the CEO of the company, right? And you're working for your company. There are 25 clients who have come to you who want a quotation, who want a pricing, who want to negotiate, who want a contract document. Will you do all the work? No, right? You'll delegate it to your resources. So you'll delegate the campaign stuff to marketing team. You'll delegate the pricing stuff to the negotiation team. You'll delegate the groundwork to the sales and service team, right? That team will again take care of completing that stuff by delegating it to the right person. So what are you doing? You're kind of creating a framework. As soon as a client comes to you, you kind of trigger a chain of events. The CEO hands it over to the 3 core people: CTO, CEO, and one more person, CFO. They route it to their teams. So handlers, I'm just giving you an example to understand why is it important. So the CEO framework routes it to each of the CTO, CEO. They send it over to the helpers, which is actually the ground staff or the actual team who works on it. So that will take care of the business functionality. So if you see, a framework is needed in pretty much everything in life, right? You cannot just be unplanned and haphazard in your life also. Similarly, with the triggers also, you should have this framework. There are different kinds of frameworks, but this is a good established, very standardized format where you create one trigger file and create a handler. In that handler, you take care of all the activities, like handle activities before update, after insert. And then in those particular handler, you actually use some modular methods also that come from your helper file or some util file. I'm sure you have seen all of this in my trigger tutorials, right? The ones which we had, which was posted, which is a pretty long video with 30 use cases. Okay, so why is it important? Why does it help? Now you know the functional or the logical idea of it, but it helps in keeping the trigger clean and it enhances the code readability and maintenance. So what happens if you write everything in your trigger file? It will be kind of a hodgepodge thing, right? You'll have to basically see everything in this one file. Let's say I have 25 different methods for 25 use cases. I write all of them in my trigger file. What will it make sense? It will not make sense. Who are we? We are people who say that Salesforce makes sense, right? So we'll have to be very cautious when we are doing anything that is around best practices, around readability, we have to write code that's neat, that's clean, and as soon as someone sees the code, that person says, ah, okay, this guy has written the code, because it should look that neat and that clean. Okay. Another bonus here, that you should always have event-based checks. So if trigger dot is update and trigger dot is insert, only then go ahead with doing the insert activities. So keep those kind of if condition checks on your trigger, so that the right methods are only executed for the right kind of events, because you don't want to run everything for every event. If a record is deleted, do you want to run the insert event? No. Why do you even have to write it? So put a check. If trigger dot is delete, then I want to run this particular method. I'm sure you've already seen that in my tutorial for triggers. Okay, but again, just wanted to put it out there. Future methods. I really love async Apex, because that gives me a lot more control in terms of the governor limits. I get a fresh set of limits, and I even like queuables better, because then you don't have the data type restriction, right? So be very open, very frank with using future methods and asynchronous Apex. They again look very dreadful and very fearful, but again, once you know how they work, you'll not fear them anymore. Okay. So be a pro and be confident. Use async Apex wherever you think you can move any code that can be done in the background. If something is not needed to be done immediately in the same transaction, be open and go ahead and use a future callout, or go ahead and use a queuable and see just how it works. Okay, it will not create a problem for you. But again, ensure that you don't overuse it. No, don't just move everything to the background. Okay, that will not help as well. So there should be a right kind of a balance. Awesome. That is all I wanted to talk about the best practices, and I have just this one more thing around tools you can use, right? So I can just add it here, but then this is again a very separate set of tutorial or curriculum that will come up soon in my channel. But what are the tools that you can use and leverage? You obviously know the developer console, right? I have used developer console in my previous tutorials, and in this Apex tutorial, in this Apex curriculum, I tried to use VS Code as much as possible, so that you could get the hang and the feel of how to use VS Code and how to write code, because you have to actually work on VS Code if you are a LWC developer or a Apex developer, right? Everything cannot be done on developer console. It is very boring, it is very slow. You have to actually move and come to VS Code or some other code editor, not dev console. Dev console is good for debugging and those kind of basic stuff, but yeah, a lot of features come in VS Codes, like autocomplete, assignment. If you see the color coding, it makes your code readable. Now you have, Einstein Copilot, and you have this GPT stuff coming in, which are coming as plugins, Agentforce. So you can actually, do auto completion. So things that are very monotonous and you don't have to write all the time, you can do it in VS Code. That's not available in dev console. VS Code with plugins, right? So if you have the right set of plugins, it makes your coding a lot more powerful. You have to do debug log analysis, GitHub Copilot, Azure repos, Git lens, Prettier. I use a lot of plugins that empower me for writing code. And yes, it's always good to just take a look at how the extension is, what does it really do, and if there's any dependencies, and then you can just enable them, install it, and use it. All right. And then you have Workbench, like any kind of import, export, deployment, package validation you need to do. You want to do anything that's beyond what VS Code and Developer Console provides, and you want to do some big import, or you want to actually do query, you want to export a bulk CSV, all of that can be done in Workbench. Or dataloader.io is also there, right? If you want to run some anonymous call out code, you can do that. You can do that on Workbench. But yes, this tools you can use and you should know is important. I will be coming up with a very detailed curriculum on each of them, so basically there would be an explained tutorial on each topic. Okay, don't worry about it. That would be a part of a separate curriculum, not part of this Apex series. All right, great. I think that's all I wanted to cover as this part of the video. Just comment below that best practices make sense, and kind of promise yourself that if you have read 10 or 12 practices here, you will follow at least 50 to 60% of them. Every time you follow a practice, that kind of comes to your muscle memory every time you write code again in future, and that is what makes you a better developer. Okay, the basic idea behind it on the philosophy side is, don't be fearful of these new things: limits, class, enhanced for loops, future methods, maps as collections. They look very dreadful, they look very complex, but they are very simple. Once you just have to do 2 or 3 use cases with them, you'll feel comfortable with them, right? It's that stranger you don't talk to, and then when you talk to them, it feels like they are your friend, they are your close friends, right? So just take them as that same concept. All right, great. I think that's all for this particular tutorial. We are very close towards the end, but still there are topics and chapters left, probably 4 or 5 of them in this curriculum series. I will see you in the next one. Till then, keep learning. Bye.